It's entitled Unclenching. It was nearly a perfect summer day for a walk. I wasn't alone. My favorite sighting on my street in Providence was a woman walking her adorable French bulldog down the street. I heard her say, "Good boy, Luke," several times as she pulled slightly on the leash to keep Luke from being too distracted. And around the corner comes another man with his dog, a pit bull. Luke immediately goes stock still. But the pit bull is wagging her tail with the greatest of hope and charm, clearly excited about the possibility of a new friend. She certainly won me over. The woman is trying to get Luke to move forward in vain because he is playing statue. Eventually, the man with a pit bull reaches the woman and her dog, and if possible, the French bulldog gets even stiffer. The woman is trying to say to Luke, "It's okay," and the pit bull sniffs hopefully and inquisitively at her new wished-for friend. And then, in an instant, Luke relaxes and sniffs back. And quickly, their tails are all a-wagging as they sniff and nuzzle and snort. And I notice that the owners have relaxed and have unclenched, and they are talking amiably, though near as I can tell, their tails are not a-wagging with the same veracity as their pets. It's only then that I realized that I had been clenching, and I now feel my own body relaxing. I left the happy foursome and headed off, thinking of how much it was a metaphor this has become for today's times. How we all seem to be living lives of trepidation, and yet hope and kindness is out there if we look beyond stereotypes, if we present ourselves with kindness, if we just try. I think about the reputation that pit bulls have, and yet she was the kindest of all. Maybe in these trying and difficult times, we need to be a little bit more like the pit bull in whatever ways we can, offering a little hope and kindness to those new friends we might make. With the war in Ukraine, with the pandemic, with all that is going on in the world, I have been thinking a lot about harm and violence. And as I think about harm and violence, in particular in the United States, I actually think of Pennsylvania and the large city many hours west of you, Pittsburgh. And I was thinking just this week about the violence that happened in the synagogue there, where the man went in and just started opening fire in an anti-Semitic rage. And yet I was also thinking just around that time, the same time, the Roman Catholic Church disclosed that there had been a significant amount of sexual misconduct on the part of Catholic priests in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. And those two events, along with the world events, have made me wonder, what is the future of religion? And why would anyone trust religion at all? But then I'm reminded of our own Unitarian Universalist minister's wise word, the Reverend Robert Fulgham, who writes, "To be human is to be religious. To be religious is to be mindful. To be mindful is to pay attention. And to pay attention is to sanctify existence." And I'm reminded we all live with religious questions. The question is, what is it that can religion do for us and for the wider world? And as I've been thinking about harm and violence, I've been thinking about minister training. And every year, we do a training for people who are new to intra-ministry. And every year I have given this exercise create a chart, a Maslowian chart of what a congregation really needs at the congregation. Start with the basics and work your way up. People have said the normal things. People need preaching, they need pastoral care, they need someone to really be a part of the congregational life, they need someone to speak about justice in the wider world. But what has intrigued me are the two things that no one has said. What no one has said is we need a minister with whom we can build trust, and we need a minister who will do no harm. And as I think about that, and the fact that this may seem so basic that people either don't think about it, I think we're at a moment when we should be talking about this. But it also has occurred to me, as I've read any number of applications and records from congregations in search, no congregation has identified doing no harm and building trust as the most important things that should happen in their ministry. And yet I think these things are vital. How do we build trust and rebuild trust in religion? How do we make our religion a place where there is no harm done in big ways and in little ways? Some 24 years ago, I had been asked when I was in my old job as the director of the Office of Bisexual, Gay, Lesbian, and Transgender Concerns for the UUA to show up in the state of Wyoming following the death of Matthew Shepard. At that time in 1998, there were only two national denominations, ours and the Metropolitan Community Church, a church for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Christians, sent national representatives. And I remember I'd been asked to show up at our congregation in Laramie, not far from where Matthew had been left to die. The minister had said, it would just be nice to have a national presence to say this matters. Could you show up and just say a few words, and then we'll go to the fence where Matthew had been left to die and leave some flowers. I was quite willing to do that. It seemed like the appropriate thing to do. So I showed up in that church morning on Sunday as part of the service. The minister, a brand new minister, his first settlement, read one letter he had gotten from someone across the country, turned to me and the congregation and said, and now Reverend Kron will give the sermon this morning to you all. I was surprised because I had not realized I was giving a sermon. I don't remember what I said, but I do know I tried to say a few words. I'd been surprised by this and wished I'd had time to prepare some remarks, but sometimes it's just enough to be there and to be present to what is going on. So later, as we went to the fence where Matthew had been tied up and left to die, the minister laid some flowers down, turned to me and the people and said, and now Reverend Kron will lead the memorial service for Matthew Shepard. Again, I don't remember what I said. I know I didn't talk too long. But again, I had been surprised. I asked him, after we had finished the two moments and we were having a meal later, I said, I was not expecting this. Can you tell me why this happened? He said, I had no idea what to do in this moment. This moment was so horrific for me. I felt completely paralyzed. And that I understood. And yet I was able to talk to him about how it is okay to be paralyzed. Just please own what is true for you so that other people can deal with it. It was a very fascinating moment to watch how harm played itself out in these huge ways. And then the little ways of catching someone by surprise. And then on the other hand, I've seen great response to harm in UU congregations. I had been asked also to preach at our congregation outside of Denver, the one in Littleton, Colorado, entitled Columbine UU Church. I was the first guest speaker some 2 weeks after the shooting at Columbine High School in 1999. And it was there I witnessed one of the most incredible acts of kindness and grace I had ever seen. I walked in to the sanctuary that morning, and literally on every wall, there were pictures and letters from Unitarian Universalists all across the United States, Canada, and the world, offering support, care, and love. They were done by religious education classes. They were done by adults, just to let them know that the congregation was held in care. Our congregation in Littleton was the closest church to the high school. Many people in the congregation had been severely affected by this. And yet it was those little things, those little acts of kindness that made such a huge difference. And a reminder how important it is to show up. The researcher and author Brene Brown talks about trust and how trust is broken, is built in little things. And it has made me wonder, if it is built in little things, is it also broken in little ways? And then I remembered back to seminary. I was in a class taught by a woman named Anna Stern. She was a Holocaust survivor. She was also a suicidologist working with families where suicide was either a potential issue or had happened. She taught a class on death and dying. And to help us prepare for the ministry, she asked us one class period to do a role play where one person was the patient in a hospital room, severely debilitated, barely able to move, barely able to speak, and one of us would be the chaplain. So someone volunteered to be the patient, and another person volunteered to be the chaplain, as we all watched. The person who volunteered to be the chaplain walked over to the patient and took the patient's hand. At which point, Anna stood up and said, "Please do never do that again." We all stopped and looked at Anna. And she said, "I want you to think about this moment. Here you have this patient lying on a bed. Everything in this patient's life is out of their control. What would happen if you had asked first, would you like me to hold your hand? May I hold your hand? If you had asked for permission and giving this person one little bit of control in their life where it has completely escaped them otherwise. To do that without asking is to, in fact, inflict some harm on this person, because you have reminded them again and again that they are out of control. Part of your role as a chaplain will to help people have some control over their lives, that they have some agency about who they are. Please remember that as you go forward. I have always carried that story with me. A reminder that violence and harm can happen in little ways. And I've been thinking about, too, our desire as a Unitarian Universalist congregation to welcome folks. And I was talking with a friend of mine who works at the UUA, who was visiting his son outside of Cleveland. He'd gone to visit his son, and he was taking his son and two of their friends who were not Unitarian Universalists to a baseball game. But on their way to the baseball game, they passed a Unitarian Universalist church. And there they saw a huge banner that said Black Lives Matter. They saw a huge rainbow flag. And immediately, the three young men immediately began talking and saying, like, well, if I were to go to church, that's where I'd want to go. This is the kind of church that I believe in. And these young men in their 20s were so excited to see that a church could be about justice, could be about welcome. And I thought about it and I wondered, well, what would happen if in fact these three young men did show up at this congregation? They would show up there wanting to make a difference. They would show up there wanting to see a world that was different. And they would be told as 25-year-old people that they are welcome in their congregation. But in all too many of our congregations, when the 25-year-old person shows up, they are told, you are welcome here as long as you act like us, as long as you act like someone who's 60 or 70 or 80. You are welcome here as long as you give like us, as long as you make a pledge, as long as you're willing to serve on 1, 2, maybe 5 committees, as long as you think exactly like us. In a time when I think the opening will be for religion to be a place of seeking and multi-theological thinking, I'm reminded of a congregation that literally wanted to vote that the only religious thought allowed in their congregation was humanism. And I wondered how many Unitarian Universalists we might be leaving out. Sometimes, even here in Unitarian Universalism, we do eat our classmates. And sometimes we can be as rigid and violent as fundamentalists from the religious right. I don't think those are answers that people will be looking for when they begin to explore human and religious questions. This could be a golden moment for Unitarian Universalism. We'll be able to reach out to those who need us, those who will want something where they can ask questions, explore, wrestle with whatever it is they need to wrestle with. Or will we be a faith that just simply gets smaller and smaller because we want to hold on to what we have been as opposed to looking to what we could be? I have asked some of our congregations in search to think about, if you really are thinking about these questions, the question for you is, will you be open to a next generation of folks? Or is what you really want a hospice chaplain as your circle grows smaller and smaller? I just believe the world needs more Unitarian Universalism, that we would all benefit it, that when we are at our best, that when we are all classmates together, we provide such opportunity for the world. I think about the Nigerian author Chimamanda Adichie, who writes, "The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story the only story." I believe people will be looking for a place where they can worship, where they can be religious, where there are many stories together and not just a single story. Will we allow ourselves to be more than a single story? Or will we continue to commit little acts of violence and make one story the only story? I think that is the question for the future of not only our faith, but all faiths. And in these times, how do we unclench? How do we do no harm? How do we pay attention? How do we sanctify existence? How do we be religious? I'm reminded of a story that the dean of my seminary once told me. He was meeting with the other deans of seminaries in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he and another dean were in serious disagreement about the course that the schools should go. And he said what intrigued him is that the other 7 deans who were all at this meeting We're more concerned about the conflict, and we're trying to make it all better. And finally, Bob turned to the other deans and said, I want you to know that Jim and I, after this meeting, we're going to go to lunch, we're going to continue to be friends, we're going to continue to disagree. But I want to know what you believe so that we can make a decision and then move forward. How can we be more than one story? How can we disagree and still be community and get together? How do we not run from diversity, whether it's an identity or religious thought, that I think actually will strengthen us? That I think is our challenge, to see the multiplicity of Unitarian Universalism in a variety of stories. A final story, one of my all-time favorites, and then I will close. This is from over 25 years ago. I had been asked to go to an interfaith conference that was on religion, gender, and sexuality. There were representatives there. This was in Nashville, Tennessee, from some 40 different faiths. Remember that 25 years ago, our technology was not what it was today. So literally, there were 40 different people in this large auditorium, and we were passing microphones back and forth to each other as we were talking. On the first day of the conference, I found myself next to John from the Church of God and Mark from the Church of Christ. John has the microphone. He goes and he introduces himself and he goes, "Hi, my name is John. I'm from the Church of God, and we are to the right of the right." He laughed and he hands the microphone to me. And I go, "Hi, my name is the Reverend Keith Kron. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. I direct the Office of Bisexual, Gay, Lesbian, and Transgender Concerns," at which point I had to stop talking because John and Mark are scooting their chairs away from me. And I said, "And we are to the left of the left." I then had to pitch the microphone to Mark to have him introduce himself. We spent the next 4 days talking about all things about religion, gender, and sexuality. Their faces were amazed that even back then we had more women than men in ministry, that we welcomed gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people into our ministry, that we had a welcoming congregation program, that we had a comprehensive sexuality education, that we started with children as young as 5 years old. It was quite the conversation. On the last day, John and Mark came up to me with two of their friends, whose names I don't remember. They were probably Matthew and Luke. And they said, "We would like to have lunch with you." And I thought, well, this will be fun. But I agreed, because they were all from Tennessee. I'm originally from Tennessee, and I figured we could connect at least on that level. So we got our lunches, we sat down at the table, and finally, Mark spoke. And Mark said, "We wanted you to know, we have listened to everything you have said this week. And we also wanted you to know that we have disagreed with everything that you have espoused. But we also wanted you to know that we respect you, because at least you are clear about what you believe. There is no question that you are sincere in your beliefs, and even though they are not ours, we can honor that." In that moment, those four very conservative religious people were my teachers. They gave me a moment to think about how we could be together, even when we disagreed. And then tentatively after that conversation, someone asked if I actually, because they'd known I'd gone to the University of Tennessee, knew anything about football. And I got to be their teacher in the moment because I knew more about football than all four of them combined. And I watched their ideas, their stereotypes break open at that particular moment, because they were amazed that not only did I know more about football, that I had officiated football, that I had officiated all sports, and could talk more intelligently about it than they could. It was a great moment of conversation, of being together, even though in many ways we were miles apart. At this moment, when the world is the way that it is, when parts of our country are so divided, I hope we will take the little steps as our faith to be together, to think about doing no harm, to not eat our classmates, to unclench, to realize that harm can come in big and little ways, and to strive to create a new future for our faith and for a world that could really use a little more Unitarian universalism. My hope is that as we move forward, as you move forward into your next ministry, that will be one of the things we hold up as one of our core values. May it be so. Let us go forth.
So once again, all too quickly, our time as beloved community comes to a close. Let us go forward carrying the learnings of this day, the affection of one another into our daily lives. May we work everywhere we go, committed to justice and lighting the way for others. We transfer this light, this chalice light, from the bowl to your hands and hearts. Amen.